A dozen eggs in Mexico costs about $2. Cross the border into the United States, and in the spring of 2025, that same dozen hit $6.23. Same continent, same bird flu, same year. One country tripled. The other barely moved. That gap is the whole puzzle. By the end, three things will be clear. Why the price of eggs exploded while the chicken sitting right next to them barely changed. Why the United States was hit so much harder than its neighbors. And why the price shot up and then quietly collapsed. For most of the past decade, a dozen eggs sat below $2. Month after month, year after year, almost boring. In January of 2022, the national average was $1.93. That was the last calm month. Then the line broke. By January of 2023, the average dozen reached $4.82, the highest price ever recorded at that point. It eased back through the following year, dipping under $3, long enough for the story to fade from the headlines. And then it climbed again, harder. In March of 2025, the average dozen reached $6.23, a new record, roughly 3 times the price of 3 years before. For a while, the shortage was impossible to miss. Stores put limits on how many cartons a shopper could buy. Some shelves sat empty. A few restaurant chains added a surcharge of 50 cents for every egg. And the country did something it had almost never done. It started importing shell eggs from Brazil and Turkey, places that had never shipped table eggs to America before, and they arrived by the millions, many times the volume of the year before. At the southern border, agents were seizing more smuggled eggs than they were seizing fentanyl. Backyard hens sold out at farm stores, and some people took to renting a few chickens by the month just to put eggs on the table. What makes a number like $6 easy to misread is that it sounds like something that has never happened before. It has. Measured against the size of a paycheck, eggs were actually more expensive back in 1975, when a dozen cost about 88 cents during the worst stretch of the great price surge of that decade. Adjusted for what money was worth then, that 88 cents was heavier than $6 feels today. The average American still eats around 274 eggs a year, roughly 5 a week, which is exactly why the price landing on a receipt gets noticed so fast. But the sharpest part of the story is not the climb. It is what came next. By the middle of 2026, the average dozen had fallen back to around $2.14. In parts of the country, wholesale eggs briefly sold for under $1. The thing that tripled had almost entirely undone itself in about a year. And then, in the summer of 2026, bird flu turned up again in commercial flocks across roughly a dozen states. The round trip, it turned out, might not be a single trip at all. So start with the question that almost never gets a straight answer. If bird flu was killing chickens by the million, why did the price of chicken meat barely move while eggs went through the roof? A shopper staring at a $6 carton next to cheap chicken breasts is right to feel that something does not add up. The answer is that they are not the same bird. The chicken raised for its meat and the chicken raised for its eggs are two different animals, bred for two different purposes, living in two different worlds. A meat bird, called a broiler, is bred to grow fast and heavy. It reaches full size in about 6 weeks and is then processed. It lives briefly, in and out, before the virus ever has much chance to find it. A laying hen is the opposite. She is bred to be lean and to lay, and she takes roughly 4 to 5 months just to reach the age where she produces her first egg. After that, she lays for well over a year. She is a long-term resident, standing in one place for a long time, and that is exactly what made her vulnerable. When the outbreak swept through, it fell overwhelmingly on the layers. Of all the commercial birds lost, more than 3/4 were egg-laying hens. The meat birds, raised in different regions of the country and gone within weeks, largely escaped. That is why the two prices split so sharply. One product lost a huge share of its producers almost overnight. The other barely noticed. And here is the part that turns a shortage into a shortage that lasts for months. When a laying flock is wiped out, it cannot simply be switched back on. A new hen has to be hatched and raised for the better part of half a year before she lays a single egg. So even after the killing stopped, the shelves stayed thin because the replacements were still growing up. The supply of eggs, in the short run, is almost frozen. It cannot stretch to meet demand no matter what the price does. Which is where the real engine of the price spike lives. To see that engine, look at how the losses actually happen. When bird flu is detected on a farm, the response is not to treat the sick birds. It is to kill all of them, the whole flock, usually within a day or two. The goal is to stop the virus before it spreads further. It is a containment rule, and it is deliberate. Now combine that rule with the way American eggs are produced. The industry is built for scale and low cost, which means enormous barns holding huge numbers of birds in one place. A single egg complex can house 3 million hens. Some hold more than 5 million. So when one bird tests positive in a building like that, the rule does not cost a few hundred birds. It costs every bird under that roof, all at once. Since the outbreak began in early 2022, more than 200 million commercial birds have been killed this way across the country. There is a quiet detail inside that system worth knowing. When the government orders a flock destroyed, it pays the producer for the birds that are culled. But it does not pay for birds that die of the disease itself. The logic is to reward farms for reporting an outbreak fast before it spreads. The side effect is that the loss of a flock, financially, is softened for the producer in a way it never is for the shopper. That concentration is the difference between a bad flu season and a national price shock. And it explains something that puzzled a lot of people. The number of birds lost, measured against the whole national flock, never sounds like a catastrophe. A few percent here. In one brutal stretch, January of 2025, nearly 19 million laying hens were gone in a single month, about 8% of the caged flock in 31 days. So how does losing a small slice of the hens triple the price? The answer is one of the stranger facts about eggs, and it comes down to how people shop. Eggs are what economists call inelastic. When the price rises, people mostly keep buying them anyway, because there is no real substitute for an egg, and it is still, even when expensive, one of the cheapest forms of protein on the shelf. A widely used estimate says that for eggs, a 1% drop in supply does not push the price up by 1%. It pushes it up closer to 7%. The demand barely bends, so almost the entire shock lands on the price. Lose a small share of the nation's hens in a short window, and the number on the carton does not rise a little. It leaps. And the reason the demand barely bends is also the reason this particular price matters more than most. An egg is one of the cheapest complete proteins a person can buy, the thing a tight budget leans on when meat is out of reach. So when the price of the cheapest protein triples, it does not land evenly. It lands hardest on the households with the least room to absorb it, the ones for whom a dozen eggs was never a small purchase to begin with. A luxury getting more expensive is an inconvenience. A staple. Getting more expensive is something else, and it is felt in a different part of the household budget entirely. It is worth pausing on what did not cause this, because plenty of other suspects get named. Feed is the single biggest ongoing cost of producing an egg, and during the worst of the spike, feed was actually getting cheaper, not more expensive. A patchwork of state laws requiring more room for hens and a shift toward cage-free barns did add cost, but measured in cents on a dozen, not dollars. Those pressures are real, and they nudge the baseline price upward over years. None of them can explain a carton tripling in a matter of months. That was the disease, and the frozen supply sitting behind it. And the disease kept coming back to the same places. Dozens of farms were hit a second or even a third time, which meant the industry was not just rebuilding once, but rebuilding over and over, each time draining supply again just as it recovered. Which brings the story back to that border. If bird flu was loose across the whole continent, why did the United States get hit so much harder than Canada or Mexico? The birds do not check passports. The difference is not the virus. It is the structure of the industry it landed in. Between the autumn of 2024 and the early months of 2025, the United States culled about 16% of its laying hens. Over the same stretch, Canada lost roughly 3%. Same disease, 5 times the damage. Part of that is those giant concentrated barns again. When millions of birds live under one roof, a single detection erases millions at once. But part of it is a choice made decades ago. Canada runs its egg industry under a system called supply management, built around smaller, more spread out flocks and steady, controlled production. When one farm goes down in a system like that, it takes a smaller share of the whole with it, and the shock to the national price is softer. So the two countries were really running two different bets. The American system is tuned for maximum efficiency and the lowest possible everyday price. Enormous farms, packed tight, squeezing out every extra cent of cost. And most years, it works. American eggs are cheap, but that same efficiency is what made the system brittle. The very design that keeps the price low in a calm year is what made it shatter in a bad one. Cheapness and fragility, in this case, turned out to be the same coin. There is one more layer to the American story, and it needs to be handled with care, because it is where fact and suspicion are easy to blur. The United States egg business is not only concentrated in its barns, it is concentrated in its ownership. A single company, Cal-Maine Foods, is by far the largest producer, selling around 1 in 5 eggs in the country. The 10 biggest producers together own more than half of the national flock. When an industry is that concentrated, its behavior draws scrutiny, and the egg industry has a documented history worth stating precisely. Here is what has actually been proven. In 2023, a federal jury found that several major egg producers and their trade groups had conspired to limit the egg supply and push up prices. That verdict covered the years 2004 to 2008. The companies were ordered to pay damages that, once tripled under the law, came to roughly $53 million. That is not a rumor or a theory. It is a jury verdict about a specific past period. Here is what is not proven. During the recent spike, the Justice Department and a group of states brought a separate case, alleging that major producers had coordinated to influence the benchmark that sets wholesale egg prices between 2022 and 2025. That case did not end in a finding of guilt. It ended in a settlement in which the companies admitted no wrongdoing and paid no fine, agreeing to donate eggs to food banks and to adopt new compliance measures. An allegation that is settled is not the same as a crime that is proven, and the difference matters. What can be stated plainly is the money. In its 2025 financial year, Cal-Maine reported a record profit of $1.22 billion, more than 4 times the year before. That is a figure from its own filings. What caused it, and how much was the shortage rather than anything else, is exactly the line the courts did not draw. So the honest version stops where the evidence stops. A concentrated industry. A proven conspiracy in the past. A settled allegation in the present. And a record profit sitting in plain view for the market to interpret. That record profit points at one last mechanism, the one that decides how a shopper actually experiences all of this. Prices, it turns out, do not go up and down the same way. They rise like a rocket and fall like a feather. Watch the timing of the peak. The all-time high of $6.23 arrived in March of 2025. But by then, the wholesale price the stores pay had already been falling for weeks, and no egg farms had reported new outbreaks that month. The shelf price kept climbing after the pressure behind it had eased. On the way up, the cost passes to the shopper almost instantly. On the way down, it lingers. Stores are quick to protect themselves when their costs rise, and slow to hand the relief back when their costs fall. This by itself is not proof that anyone did anything wrong. It happens across many products for ordinary reasons, from the cost of changing price labels to the simple fact that a store will charge what people are still willing to pay. But it is why the pain of a price spike always feels longer than the shortage that caused it. The bird flu eased. The receipt took its time catching up. The same slow machinery that made the shortage last also explains the crash on the other side. Once the killing slowed, the hatcheries kept doing what they had been doing all along, raising young hens by the millions. When enough of them finally reached laying age at roughly the same time, the supply did not trickle back. It flooded back. All those replacement hens started laying at once, into a market where shoppers had spent a year buying fewer eggs, skipping them, or getting used to doing without. Too many eggs, chasing softer demand, and the price that had taken years to climb gave most of it back in months. For a stretch in early 2026, farmers were selling eggs for less than it cost to produce them. The rocket, this time, finally came down. Step back from the carton, and the egg turns out to be telling a much bigger story than breakfast. What happened here was not really about a virus. It was about a choice. A food system can be built for efficiency, driving the everyday price as low as it will go, or it can be built to absorb a shock without buckling. The American egg industry chose efficiency, almost completely, and for years it delivered some of the cheapest eggs in the world. The bill for that choice came due all at once, when a single disease could tear through barns holding millions of birds and freeze the supply for months. There is a way to soften the next blow. A vaccine for poultry exists and has been conditionally approved. But using it carries its own price. Many countries refuse to buy poultry from nations that vaccinate, because a vaccinated bird can carry the virus quietly, and the United States sells a great deal of chicken abroad. So the country has, so far, chosen to keep managing the disease the hard way, by killing and rebuilding, rather than risk those export markets. That is a trade-off, not an accident, and reasonable people weigh it differently. Other countries drew the line elsewhere. France began vaccinating its ducks and watched its outbreaks fall by more than 90% in a single season. The tools to blunt the shock exist. Using them means accepting a different bill, and each country has chosen where to send it. What the round trip leaves behind is a simple, uncomfortable picture. The same design that makes a thing cheap can be the thing that makes it fragile. The eggs came back down. The hens are being rebuilt. And the flu, having returned to a dozen states in the summer of 2026, is a reminder that nothing about the underlying system has actually changed. The price of an egg is small. What it reveals is not.